This is an unprecedented series of events. I don't think any market has really been subject to anything like this before.
Barry, if you'll just do a quick introduction for yourself, and then we can get a sound check for your side as well.
Absolutely. So thank you, Daniella. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Barry Fitzgerald, and I'm the owner of iTrip Vacations, South Carolina Sea Islands. We are a full-service property management provider, specialize in the short-term vacation rental market, which obviously is a very robust market here in South Carolina. So we're hopefully here to provide some insight into a little bit of how the market is, and also a little bit about the investors and what it looks like for them at this point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation and a very fascinating topic, generally speaking, but in particular right now, because I think that there's so much confusion as to not only what's happening, but what you're really allowed to do. We get information from our powers that be on a fairly regular basis, but a lot of it's contradictory on the one hand, but just frankly vague on the other. So I don't think people really feel comfortable stepping out and making any sort of a move because they don't really know what they could or could not be cited for. And of course, we're at that point now. So just starting out with this whole conversation about real estate investing, and particularly in the short-term market here, which, as you said, is a very robust market. We are in a second, third, fourth plus home market here in Beaufort County, and we have several different submarkets under that. But what are you seeing? What are you seeing in the short-term market right now as far as how is it responding to this?
Well, this is an unprecedented series of events. I don't think any market has really been subject to anything like this before. But some of the hardest hit markets, obviously, are the real estate markets, travel industry, and in particular, the short-term vacation rental business, which has been impacted pretty significantly over the last 6 to 8 weeks. You mentioned about the guidance now and what's happening actually with regard to the short-term rentals in the market here. Here in South Carolina, Governor McMaster actually issued a series of executive orders talking anything from what are necessary businesses to remain open. His most recent directive actually mentioned short-term rentals for the first time. And what he specified was that short-term rentals are not, so we're currently not allowed to rent to guests coming from what's called the CDC hot zone. So specifically New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and there are one or two other markets that are identified. So again, that executive order has been interpreted quite differently by different homeowner associations in different jurisdictions here. So as an example, I have properties on Fripp Island, and I have properties on Harbor Island as well as Beaufort and Port Royal. The Fripp Island resort is technically still open. We are enforcing the governor's orders through actually interviewing the guests. So guests typically can book online, book direct. We're actually reaching out and interfacing with each of the guests that are actually trying to rent properties in the market now to ascertain where they're coming from, if they have any issues with regard to places they're visited, so that we can kind of meet the intent of the spirit of the executive order. Harbor Island is another example. They actually issued some guidelines to their homeowners prohibiting short-term rentals altogether for an indefinite period. I received another actual email just this morning from a homeowner, forwarded me a message that they are reconsidering that edict recently.
That Harbor Island's reconsidering.
Yes, Harbor Island is reconsidering, and they will update their homeowners soon. Hilton Head Island had actually issued a ban on short-term rentals about a week ago, and they were forced to rescind it. And I think the reality of it is that's they're starting to bump up against some of the homeowners' rights and other things. So there's still a lot of confusion in the regulatory side of it. There are a lot of stay-in-place orders, so people are confused as to whether they can travel through an area to get to a resort where they can actually stay. And I wished I had an answer for that, but the reality of it is I'm telling all my potential guests keeping them abreast of at least what that might result in, and letting them know that, travel at your own risk.
Right, right. Well, that's fair enough. And, kind of going back to the issue of some of these things being kind of vague, and you're in the industry. And so if you don't have a direct answer, I don't know that any of us do. So I suppose it's just renter beware and be careful, right? And if you're going to do it, realize that you may risk going up against, let's say, being pulled over by someone who has their own interpretation of what the rules are right now. And I think that that's a real risk. So, but it's interesting because, as you say, it's considered an essential business, as is real estate. I think about this on my own side of things. What exactly are we allowed to do? Because there are certain things you just simply cannot do virtually. And what counts there, and all the different pieces and all the different people and variables, right?
Correct.
And of making sure that all of those can actually happen smoothly and without any sort of legal repercussions. So this is a very interesting time that we're in. And I'm glad that you clarified that a little bit. So the very short version, if you could just kind of review that, recap for our viewers, who is allowed to rent here in the short-term market?
Anyone technically can. When you say who's as a property owner and homeowners, you're free to rent your property. The guidelines and the guidance is at this point that we are not renting to people who are traveling to this area from areas covered under the COVID-19 travel warning, which essentially are New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and a few other spots.
Right. So those hot spots, as we're hearing them. Okay. So that's what we're allowed to do. Now I'm curious as to what you're seeing as far as what people are actually doing. Now you do this, as we said, you do this for a living, and you're right in the short-term market. And I'd be curious to know, even if people were, let's say, legally allowed, there's a lot of concern over the health risks of this, because as I've talked about in a couple of these other shows, this is not an economic-based issue. It's having massive economic ramifications, but this is actually a global health issue at its base. So there are other variables and other concerns at play outside of just affordability, cash flow, things like that. So are you seeing people drop out of the market as renters or as rental owners, for that matter?
It's actually there. So those two questions are actually very good questions. The bookings themselves. So guests, there's a ton of data out there that's been generated in the past 6 weeks. I go through it on a daily basis with regard to the booking numbers, cancellation numbers, things like that. And it's really unprecedented. So just as an example, from year over year, from mid-February to mid-April or to date, bookings are down from last year something on the order of between 80 and 95%, and that's nationwide. So the market has really been hit badly. And it's interesting, if you plot those that time frame, and you overlay a series of events that have occurred around the world with regard to when the virus was first identified, when the first case in the U.S. was reported, when the presidents began to issue some requirements and restrictions, you can see that there's a precipitous drop-off almost right off the cliff. It's beginning in about mid-February and continuing through now. So the forecast for the market right now, at least through May, is really not good. We're talking about an 80% deduction or reduction in our bookings, and that translates directly to an 80% reduction in revenue for our homeowners.
Just imagine an 80% reduction in economic activity overall, right? I mean, you're one cog in the massive wheel that is the American economy. And so that is a devastating number. And while it maybe for some of our viewers, it doesn't sound surprising because of the nature of your business in this particular climate, 80% is enormous.
Absolutely. There were a number of early trends, so that around spring break time, when they began to close beaches in Florida and the cruise industry became impacted, there's an interesting little spike right around a certain period where people were trying to book properties in Florida before some of the beaches got closed, and in some other non-traditional spring break destinations. So there was a very short spike, and then some of those municipalities and some of those areas began to incorporate their own restrictions with regard to closing of beaches, closing of restaurants, etc. So that's kind of now is trailed off. The other part of your question had to do with the homeowners
The owners,
themselves.
yeah, right.
Yes, and obviously, if you're an owner, you can't turn on a dime. You can't just say, "Okay, I'm going to get rid of this house," as you well know.
Right.
So
For every seller, there has to be a buyer.
absolutely. So owners are dealing with a lot of pain right now, particularly those owners who are dependent on the rental income to pay their mortgage, pay their expenses, and other things. So what we're seeing though is obviously we're not, and you would see this probably before I would see it, because it's not uncommon for me to actually be renting properties that are also for sale. That is a strategy that a lot of sellers like to adopt because they think it's attractive to a potential buyer to be able to show a rental history. So
Right.
you would see that uptick in inventory in terms of sales before I would, but overall they're predicting that the inventory itself has not really been reduced as far as the rental market goes. So people are not necessarily taking their properties offline in response to this, just the opposite. I'm getting calls from homeowners who are looking to find more creative ways to fill their properties during this
Sure.
crisis.
Because they need that income. For people who are maybe reviewing right now who are not or have not been real estate investors specifically, and of course, there's a difference between purchasing an investment and just holding it as part of your portfolio and actually being a real estate investor. But for the case in this conversation, I'll just sort of use them as one and the same. If you've invested in real estate, I'll just call you an investor for clarification. But a lot of times, those purchases are leveraged, and when all is going great, that's perfectly fine because money is so cheap right now, even with those those non-standard primary home purchases, the rates are just so good. And so in a perfect world, even if you're calculating, let's say you're building a 10% vacancy, something like that, 10% is a far cry from 80. And there, when you're trying to make up now a 70% delta, sometimes more, and you still have obligations. Now, granted, there are some things that have been put in place to alleviate those things for the short term, but that's still a major concern. And I can certainly see that being a big squeeze on this industry for the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because booking, the way that bookings are typically looked at, guests book in kind of booking windows. The 30-day window, which is kind of that impulse last minute kind of travel, versus the 60-day, 90-day. Our prime weeks are booked, much further back in advance. So even though a lot of the summer bookings right now are continuing to at least stay on the books, I think I don't quite share the same level of optimism on some of my colleagues are about once we flip the switch, everything is going to be great. Partly because, and partly why I think those bookings are still in place, is due to your cancellation policy. So typical cancellation policy is 30 days. So if you cancel any reservation 30 days prior to your arrival, you're generally receiving a full refund. So some people are just playing a wait and see attitude. The closer you get to that 30-day window, the more I expect to see my cancellations kind of increase as well. So it's not only having a short-term impact. I think the longer-term impact is going to be more from a financial perspective, depending upon how quickly the economy recovers and quickly people get back to work. Hopefully, as I said, right now, the picture is a short-term disaster, and some optimism, at least with regard to the longer term, the 6 to 9 month kind of view.
Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that that's your perspective. And I would agree with you as far as that optimism into the mid and certainly long term. The thing in my side of the industry, on the sales side of the industry, whether that is new construction or resale, is that frankly, all of these people who are pulling out of the market right now, they'll come back. Those life factors that were the case now that they decided to hold off, they'll still be the case then, and they may even change again. So in my side of the industry, in the sales side of real estate, those people will come back, and that's what, of course, we call in the industry pent-up demand. And so we're going to see a lot of that. So as long as you can weather the storm currently and make it through and come out the other side and still be viable as a business, you can be there to embrace those people when they need you. And that's certainly our plan. I think that that's really the critical component here, is just make sure that you have your ducks in a row insofar as you can make it through this rough patch. And when you come out the other side, all of those people will be there again because they're still here.
Yeah, and that's exactly the approach that we're taking here at iTrip. I mean, iTrip's a franchise. I've got a lot of support behind me. This is going to have a huge impact on a lot of small businesses, and some of those small businesses, unfortunately, are just are not equipped to handle it. I've made an investment in this business. We're not going anywhere, so we'll be here in the long run. Another interesting point you brought up with regard to the market and upsides, even in a downside market, is there are a lot of buying opportunities out there for the true investor. People are going to begin to start putting properties on the market. It's interesting. I actually got a call from a realtor this morning telling me that she was showing a large property on Fripp and asked me to develop pro forma for her. So, there are people that are still, interested in this market. The true investors recognize that there are bargains to be had, and I would just encourage those people when they're at, the short-term return on investment may be a little different. We still don't really know how it's all going to shake out for the remainder of 2020. But overall, this market is strong. Here in South Carolina, the vacation rental business is it's growing exponentially year over year. It's not likely to change. So there are some opportunities for people who are actually looking to buy. I'm here to service them.
Absolutely. And certainly, as am I, shameless plug here, but that's
Absolutely.
certainly something that I've been having a lot of conversations with clients about, because what we're seeing from the sales side, which of course feeds right into, you have the acquisition of property, that's me, and then you have the management of property, that's you. So these are spaces within the same industry that play inherently together. They need each other. And so for my side of it, anytime you have a downturn like this, regardless of what catalyzed it, it is always, without fail, an opportunity for at least one group of people. And that group of people are those who are financially prepared for these situations, such that they are literally waiting for them to happen in a way, because the world doesn't stop. A lot of things change and a lot of things slow, but the world doesn't stop, and it hasn't stopped. And they are the ones who are waiting, and they actually make money in this situation. And it's not a bad thing. And I'm very tired of hearing people talk about the fact that these people are being victimized and all these things. That's absolutely not true. If someone still needs to buy or sell during this time, and all the people that help them achieve that goal dry up because they feel badly, or they feel like it's some sort of, they lack virtue for doing their jobs in a difficult time, then those people are left to try and learn a new skill while they're still trying to put food on the table. And I think that that's a problem. And I think that's a real mistake to think of it that way. I think it's very important that we remain active and available for our clients and our potential clients and customers, because these are not the times to get into a new industry. This is the time to work with someone who really knows what they're doing and who has been through things like this before, who can help you navigate safely and smoothly and legally and intelligently and all those things, right, that you're looking for in a professional. And so this is an opportunity, though. I don't know that a lot of people know this about our business, because we don't market this the way that we do with other pieces of it. But one of the arms of the Hilton Head Life and the Beaufort Life is investments. And that is real estate investments. That's commercial and residential. In this area, our residential is primarily single family. We don't have a lot of multi-unit here. But the reason that I'm mentioning this is to say that these are questions that we are well equipped to answer. And so for somebody who is thinking of investing in this market during this time, we're not quite to that panic price mode yet. There are still active buyers in the market who are just, as you might say, normal buyers. But we're getting to a place where people are starting to reduce those prices in a way that you wouldn't expect to see in early spring, which is, of course, where we are right now. So we're starting to see it, and opportunities are popping up right now on a one-off basis, more than market wide. But you need somebody that knows the market to be able to tell you where those opportunities are and what they look like. And then they can talk to you to get that pro forma and run those numbers and see if that's actually a cash flow opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the pro forma. One of the services that I provide, if you will, for both real estate agents and individual homeowners or investors in general, is a pro forma, and it's a pretty robust set of data that actually will help them understand, is this a good investment? So it uses actual market data that's been collected and scraped off a number of different online travel sites to predict and accurately model what the future occupancy numbers are. and what the future average daily rates are that are out there for properties in the inventory. So that's a pretty powerful tool that will give a potential homeowner or a potential investor a much higher degree of confidence in whether or not they can make this transaction work for them. I'm a licensed property manager. I do not sell real estate, so my best friends are real estate agents because I work very closely with them to help them either sell their listings or help them with potential buyers who are looking for properties or need some assistance with regard to what's the right property to buy, what's going to give them a better cap rate, and so on. So I'm glad you mentioned the pro forma.
Absolutely. And what a wonderful tool that is for real estate professionals on the sales side who have access to you and that service so that they can help their clients make the most informed decisions, whether on the buy or sell side.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Well, Barry, thank you so very much for joining us today. Do you have any last minute thoughts? Anything that you would, I forgot to ask you my most important question. What is one thing that you would suggest to people right now that they should be doing from your perspective during this time?
From a homeowner perspective or a guest perspective? I mean, because my constituents are both. So from a homeowner perspective, and I'm actually doing this for them, but the most coming out of this, and we will come out of this at some point, what guests expect is going to change significantly. Typically, guests have looked at location, price, cleanliness always ranks up there, and amenities. However, everything is pointing to the fact that that shift is now going to be almost 100% on how clean the properties are and how well they're maintained. So my advice to a homeowner would be hire a professional property manager who will hire then professional cleaners and professional maintenance personnel to keep your property clean and safe for your guests. Renter perspective, I think they're going to be concerned as well with, what processes have been followed in order to clean this property. I mean, obviously, there's still so much we don't know about how the virus spreads, where it spreads, how long it stays on surfaces. We're following CDC guidelines with regard to cleaning and sanitization of all of our properties. Obviously, our goal is to give our guests the highest degree of confidence we can in the fact that they'll be safe in the home.
Perfect. Well, Barry Fitzgerald, iTrip Vacations, thank you for being part of this. Much appreciated. That was fantastic information. Viewers, if you enjoyed this, please go and give Barry a like. Make sure that you're following me so that you can see these. Now, this one was a little bit of an outlier as we get onto a calendar here. I am going to start doing these. They will be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So tune in midday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the foreseeable future to see these and get a lot of great information. And if you're seeing this on YouTube later, go ahead and click subscribe and make sure you like the video. And thank you so much, Barry. Have a great day.
Thank you much.